Today's webinar is specifically focused around the STRATFI process. And with the STRATFI applications due on 18 September, which is 41 days and 22 hours and 58 minutes away, I wanted to make sure that we're diving into the actual aspects of the STRATFI process and digging into what those are. So this isn't going to be a traditional like present to you and here's all the tips. If you want to see some tips and strategies and like breakthrough, you can check out some of our previous webinars. Today, we're going to dive through the documents and talk about how do you position them, how do you frame them so you can be successful. You might be wondering why Joey is talking about this, why we're at the Outpost putting this on. Well, our focus here at the Outpost is to help companies grow and scale in the federal space. And this team was founded by the co-founders of AFWorks, including myself. We helped build and write the STRATFI process because we wanted to see companies be successful. And we have an enormous success rate around the STRATFI process and helping companies go through this. And I want to see more companies win. I want to see you have a successful STRATFI package because this isn't a competition against each other. This is a competition of can you get the funding and can you get selected for matching funding so you can keep building your company. And the more companies that win in the space, the more America is going to win. That's what I really care about and why we're here doing this webinar today. If you want to learn more about how we help and what we do, happy to chat about that a little bit later. Today's webinar is going to be focused on breaking down the application portions and then digging into it. Thank you for the folks that have jumped in to tell a little bit about what you're doing around your company and where you're at. For the companies that are in direct to phase 2s and are not pursuing STRATFI actively right now, this is going to be a breakdown of the actual package today. And then where we can do a deeper dive into the overarching parts of the STRATFI program at a different time. So, all right, gonna go ahead and get started. So thank you for making time and listening to our kickoff. All right, now, as you see here, we're now down to 41 days, 22 hours and 56 minutes. STRATFI here is focused on the $3 to $15 million increase. We're going to be talking about whether you're a defense-only opportunity or a dual-use opportunity. You should meet these eligibility criteria to be able to pursue your STRATFI. And as you're looking at this page, the things that I want you to really focus on are going to be the guidance documentation and the submission templates here. If you take a look here at the guidance documentation, then what you're seeing is here's all the actual requirements. You want to make sure that you're reading through these and checking back here to see if there is any updated versions around this. So make sure you're reading this notice of opportunity and going through the details here. Today, we're focusing on what actually happened as part of the submission package. If you take a look here, there's actually over a dozen items that you need to submit as part of your STRATFI submission process. I'm going to take a focus and highlight on the ones that I think are most important for you to be successful today. And I would love if you can jump into here on what questions you have about these particular package items, what you're struggling with, where you might want help. So happy to work through that with everybody here today. All right. So the first thing that we're going to go over is actually not in order here, but the document I think is the most important through the process. The collaboration agreement is the central document around which you're building your entire STRATFI package around, actually, because this is where you're getting that requirement buy-off from both your customer and your end user. You should probably be familiar with the customer and user pieces of this if you're already in the direct to phase 2 process or you have your phase 2, because those are the terms that are being used as part of the customer memorandum side. Think about this as a supercharged customer memo. And the big difference in some of the signatories that you're having here is really around the STRATFI process. For a STRATFI, the customer champion has to be at the strategic level, and it has to be the program executive office, the Air Force Material Command Center, a Joint Force Program Office, and that signatory must be the ranking member of that organization. So get a lot of questions around, does this mean it can be somebody who's not Air Force to be the signing as the customer champion? Correct. they can, but there needs to be a direct tie-in to why that organization is supporting an Air Force end user. And the Air Force end user here has to be at 06 or GS15 minimum. And they're the ones that are going to be signing on the end user side. And that has to be an Air Force person. So if you're looking at this, this is the central core document you're building around. And you're like, hey, if we're getting these signatures, well, how are we getting them? What are we doing to convince them? And that's really what the collaboration agreement is built around, is explaining what your project is, how this ties into the Air Force strategic needs, and what you're doing to transition your project from that prototype effort during your phase 2 to scaling after that. So as you're taking a look here, you want to be clear about the purpose. Your end user organization and customer organization need to be matching on the bottom of half of the document. You need to be clear that your funding agreement number and other information about your phase 2 is absolutely correct. And you want to be clear about putting that number in here and having that match across the capability package, across everything else that you're doing. The defense mission need, there's two things in here that you're seeing that, like, hey, what's the difference between the defense mission need and operational imperatives? Well, the defense mission need comes from the Air Force's science and technology strategy. And make sure you click through this document and break out which one of these are applicable to you. The reason you're pulling from the S&T document is because the Air Force is funding the matching funds through the SBIR and STTR programs. So the SBIR funding is used for R&D purposes. So you want to tie back to where is the Air Force headed around the R&D purposes of the organization. At the same time, the purpose of the STRATFI is to drive transition for your capability. So how are you using this in an operational context, and how does this impact the warfighter on a day-to-day basis? So you want to be able to tie in from the S&T strategy here under defense mission need to the Air Force's operational imperatives. And how are you lined up with what the Air Force is doing on a day-to-day operational basis? And so the Air Force laid out the operational imperatives from the Secretary of the Air Force and said, hey, Air Force, this is the direction we want to head. So how is the work you're tied to related to where the Air Force is heading in a strategic direction from the Secretary of the Air Force? You want to be able to specifically align with each of those and know if you're like, hey, directly engaged with it. Are you supporting this? Or is it tangentially related? Or is it unrelated to this effort? You don't need to hit direct on every single one of these. You most likely won't, because capabilities are meant to be bucketed. So make sure you're going into here and breaking that portion down. Under the core competencies, this is similar to the operational imperatives, but for the Space Force side. So you want to make sure that you are clear around if it's an Air Force or Space Force one, that you're or Air Force or Space Force focus that you're pursuing, and be able to answer that in here. And then under the impact here, you want to clearly articulate how your project is going to have a strategic level impact on the Department of the Air Force. How are you going to make an impact not only at the unit and end user level, but where is this scaling to? How is that tied into your longer term strategy and as a company, and the impact to the Department of the Air Force? You want to make sure that you're pulling that whole narrative through, not only from where you're at with your phase 2, but all the way here to the end. And that's a key part of making sure you have a strong portion here on your collaboration agreement. And then project timeline, pretty simple. As you're building out your milestone documents, you may not do a 48-month STRATFI. So make sure you have that information correct in here. Pull the right information here around the customer and end user. This is the intent here is to show that there are funds coming in, and you need that for both the defense only and dual use options for STRATFI. All of these are the POCs that come together as part of your STRATFI application. You want to make sure here that you have all of these filled out. You need to make sure that you're working with your customer to get all of this information correct, including especially these staff functions providing concurrence. And this will tie into what we're talking about a little bit later, especially on the finance and contracting side with the delegation of authority for both the FM and contracting responsibility memos that need to be signed. Those sections are referenced here in this document. So all the big things about STRATFI is that they all tie together. And you want to make sure you're pulling these different pieces together and they're all correct as you're putting your package in place. That's one of the biggest things that DQs people's STRATFI submissions. Here is your program of record transition strategy. These questions they're asking and they've highlighted because they want you to specifically answer those. How is this going to actually transition to the warfighter after you get the R&D funding? Is this in the POM? Do you have money that is programmed against a specific capability for your company in the future? Is it in the requirements process? Has it already started? Is it already completed and you're in the 26, 27, 28 POM? Where are you in that process? You need to be very clear about that here in the transition strategy. You need to specifically talk through that with your customer, and they need to understand that this portion is weighed super heavily as they're looking at the strategic impact across the Air Force. And, if we put this extra money in, where is this project actually going to go? Then you have some basic information you need to answer across installation access, cybersecurity, human subject research, flight testing. So make sure you're going through here and answering those. These are going to be the critical parts to make sure if you have each of these components, you need to validate, hey, how are we going to address that? We can talk about that at a different time. And then as you're looking down here about your end user and customer champion again, you want to make sure you're also communicating why these are the right people and how they are tied to this effort as a whole. And that's something you want to make sure you're doing as part of your program of record transition strategy right here. And you want to make sure that you're communicating that under your impact section right here as well. So how do these organizations all fit together? Then the last thing you want to take a look at is you need to include the non-proprietary work plan and the STRATFI submission quad chart in this process as well. And the STRATFI submission quad chart looks like this. And this information for the submission process is going to go up to the acquisition secretaries for both the Space Force and the Air Force. And you want to be super clear around what you're communicating here. And you can't change this format. The Air Force has requested that you submit it in this process. So you want to make sure that you are, excuse me, that you're filling this information out. You're answering these succinctly. And a lot of companies will fill this out, feel like they got it super tight. But I would encourage you to do the grandparents test. The grandparents test is take this single page, give it to your grandparents, someone who is not engaged with the project at all, and someone who's not involved, and have them read this and say, does this make sense? Does this image make sense? Do the milestones make sense? Does the innovation make sense? The people that are going to be reviewing these don't have any familiarity with your project. They might get pre-briefs, they might get engagements otherwise, but you need this document to stand alone and you need it to communicate effectively. So build it and do the grandparents test with this. Make sure that someone who is unrelated to the project but cares about you and wants you to see you successful is reviewing this and says, yep, this makes sense and is very clear to me. That's something you want to make sure you're doing. All right. We talked about the pod chart. We've talked about the collaboration agreement. And like, hey, there's also this big portion of the capability package. What should I be focused on here? Here in the capability package section, there's a lot of basic information about your company. This stuff is self-explanatory and questions you need to answer. So I'm going to let you go through this and answer those yourselves. These tech areas are also going back to that S&T strategy as part of what we're responding to. And they provided the link here for where you need to pick from. We have continued information around your company and SBIR award history. This ties back to the phase 2 information. So you want to make sure that this is absolutely correct and matches across all your documents and in your submission process. And now here's where we get into the interesting portion starting at 4.2. You want to make sure that you're providing a summary of the project that you've completed and tying that into what further development needs to happen. And that's this whole section right here. It talks about what you've done technically, What are those phase 2 successes? And then what do you need to continue doing in order for this product to be successful and roll out across the enterprise? And this ties back here, right, to some of the defense need sections under the collaboration agreement. You're going to want to start tying that narrative in here on the remaining technical risks and then why this is a big part of your STRATFI effort. So you want to pull that thread all the way through here. You'll see here, this is tied back to the collaboration agreement. Same here in 5.3, you want to pull that information over. And then down here in 5.5, 5.5 and 5.6, we talked a little bit about this in the collaboration agreement, but why are these the right people? Why are they going to be the ones to use your product? Why are they going to be the ones to fund this product long-term? How are they managing the budget for this? Do they own the process? Do they own the program? Where does that all get tied into? You want to make sure you're being super clear about answering that here in this section. Then you have the summary of proposed regulatory, technical, or schedule risks. Any project is going to have risk in it of what could be successful, what could not be. You want to be clear about those and you want to be precise. This isn't a place to get dinged. This is a place to be clear-eyed around here are the challenges we're going to work through and how we're going to get through those. And how are you going to address these risks in the development process for your company? Now, the last section here is the commercialization strategy. You want to, in this section, be very direct around what your plan is as a company, if you're a dual use company, and how are you selling your product? How are you selling your service? Where are you heading in the market? Have you achieved $5 million in revenue this year? And then as a result of these efforts and developments, you will be on track for 10, 15, $20 million in sales. Are you using this to finalize the prototype of the system that you're building? And then as a result of the STRATFI getting this funding, you'll have a finalized prototype and you can go out and drive commercial sales as a result because you have a completed product. Be clear about how you're doing this, what you're using the money for, because the intent of the SBIR program is to commercialize technologies. They want to see how companies are going to be successful outside of R&D dollars. And this is your section to communicate that. Be direct exactly on your revenue numbers. Put in charts in here. Good proposals should be about 50% of graphics. So you want to make sure that you're communicating that effectively throughout this whole process. All right, we have the milestone spend plan here. This is a longer topic that we could spend the whole time on, but I wanted to highlight for folks that your task description here, these items need to start matching your non-proprietary work plan and the documents that are related here under your collaboration agreement and your quad chart. So this is where you need all these things to tie together. You need to make sure that the timelines are all matching together. You need to be clear about what the deliverable is and your acceptance criteria. And then are you requesting SBIR or SITR funds? What year of funds are you requesting? And the thing you want to think about in this process is the submissions happening on September 18th. They've averaged about 6 to 8 months to notify companies. So you're looking at using FY25 money in this process. And so if you start, let's say, next May or June, then plus N months, how does that get laid out? If they're able to respond quicker, right? Do you have enough laid out here in the project to get started and get moving? And the nice thing about the SBIR and STTR funds is that they're 2 years of availability around those funds. They don't have to be spent in the year that they're appropriated. It's the nice thing about the R&D dollars there. But around your Air Force matching funds and your Space Force matching funds, based off of what year that money is going through and what color of money, you might have to make sure that that gets spent in that year. So you're aligning that with this particular project and what those milestones are. And at the end of the day, you're going to want all of these numbers to match. So don't change anything here in orange. And you want to get down here to the bottom and make sure that these totals are all correct, because you're going to have if you're requesting, let's say, $500,000 of SBIR funds, you want to make sure that you're bringing in the same government funds and private match funds in that year. If you have an overage in 1 year of government funds or private funds, let's say you've already done your raise, then you can use that money to then unlock the future year funding. So you don't have to spread it out, year over year. You can spread it out and front load a lot of that. So you can spread out the SBIR funding and front load government or private matching funding or both. So that's a big thing people want to take a look at. All right, we're going to move and jump to the government funding letter pieces. If you all have questions, please jump into the Q&A and ask. I can answer them around the specific document that we're on. So please go ahead and do that as well. Here under the government funding letter section, big thing that you want to make sure you're communicating with your stakeholders is that these letters serve as an intent to fund and they're not legally binding. A lot of organizations and their legal offices are saying, why are we committing out your funds? We aren't allowed to do that. You want to make sure that you're communicating that, hey, this is allowed and here are the regulations that apply to that. There's further references to this in the collaboration agreement. And if you have any trouble with that, also happy to help you talk with the respective organizations. So here's the highlight for where that authority is. Other things you want to do here are make sure that you're including part of the work plan and how this funding is tied back to that work plan, because you're going to get different funding letters from different organizations. So you want to tie their piece back to the larger effort. And as you look at your capability package and collaboration agreement, you want to make sure you're tying this stuff all the way through there as well. If you're putting on a phase 3 ahead of time, you want to make sure that you're communicating that to your contracting officer and team, and you want to be clear about how this is tied together there. All right. The two other final documents you want to make sure you're doing correctly are the FM memo and the contracting memo. There's a requirement here that these organizations are going to help you get this on contract. So you have to have the same POCs that you have in your collaboration agreement. And then you want to make sure that you're answering the work that they're going to do and how that ties to your effort. So you want to be clear, like, are they putting a phase 3 in place? Are they going to just put the matching funds on contract because you already have phase 3s in place? Do you already have the matching funding come through on the private side, or is that going to come through in those years? These are the types of things that you want to make sure are clearly identified and communicated with on both your FM and contracting letters. On your private funding letters, the other thing to note is you need to have the first 2 years of funds accounted for in the STRATFI process. And if it's beyond those 2 years, you need to be able to communicate where they might come from, but it isn't a requirement for that side. All right. Thank you for taking the time to deep dive into this with me. I am here to help answer specific questions and go through any of the challenges you might be having as you're going through the STRATFI process. This webinar was very focused around how you can take your package items and make those successful and communicate effectively there. If you're interested in doing an overview around STRATFI as a whole, happy to answer those questions as well. All right, we have 5 minutes for questions. We'll open the floor. All right, we got a question in that says, hey, if we have identified our first $5 million of matching funds for STRATFI, can we, and that's all in the first year, but we don't know about future years, can we still submit our STRATFI package? Around the package submission depends on which one you're going after. So if you're going after the defense only, $5 million is not going to be enough. If you're going after the dual use option, then yes, you can. I got another question in here of, can we do a year-long STRATFI to the full max funding? Yes, but you're going to have to be very clear on how you're planning on spending that money, and you have the capacity to do so. I got another question here. Does the government provided launch capacity qualify as cost share on TACFI STRATFI? How would the dollar value be determined in a TACFI STRATFI proposal if so? So this is a question that you need to double check with your government stakeholder of what are they quantifying that launch cost at. The government provided launch capacity needs to be very, there is a dollar amount tied to that on the government side. So if that is in kind, that is something you want to make sure you're addressing, and looking through the matching funds guidance. You want to engage with the Ventures team ahead of time to let them know you're doing something that's non-standard around the government matching funds process. And the government needs to provide a specific number to that of what they are giving in this case, because that matching funds process does require cash in exchange for this effort. So you want to be direct around that. All right. Next question. Our company is currently funded by AMC, not through a direct to phase 2, but we are at that pace with our product. Can we still apply even though we've not been funded through a phase 2? No, you cannot. You need to have a phase 2, whether it be specific topic or open topic, in order to apply to the STRATFI program.